hello, dear colleagues. Topic you can see in program, it is topic of my dissertation, Soviet legacy and memory politics in Ukraine in 2004-2015. But the topic of abstract I will present right now, it is just part of my dissertation. Its name, Memory Politics in Ukraine after Euromaidan, Outspin of Soviet Cultural Legacy. Aim of research I present right now, it is to show transformation of historical memory and memory politics inside Ukrainian society under the influence of political and social upheavals of 2015. There could be distinguished two key areas of transformations in memory politics in this time. It is changes in the perception of Soviet cultural legacy, and it is formation of culture of memory about Euromaidan. These two processes connected between themselves. We would like to show how. At first, I have to say that preparing my report, I faced some difficulties because just a few days before start of our conference, Ukrainian parliament adopted a few laws that radically changed the memory politics about Soviet past. So I have to add a lot and to rethink something just in the last moment. Hopefully we have time to explain all of it. So firstly, there is a need to understand the context of process. There is a need of short review of memory politics in modern history of Ukraine. First period of time, it is the time of presidency of Leonid Kravchuk and Leonid Kuchma. It is a situation of only directional historical politics, combination of national and Soviet paradigm and avoidance of features and events that threatens political antagonisms. Then time of presidency of Viktor Yushchenko. Historical politics was a key issue of humanitarian politics of this president. It was a time of nationalization of history, orientation on a cultural homogeneous nation, and the reckoning of the totalitarian legacy. Its effect was the polarization of society, conversion of many historical subjects in the political realm. It started battles over history between president and opposition, who often protected Soviet cultural legacy. And then was time of presidency of Viktor Yanukovych, who presented this opposition, who opposed to memory politics of Viktor Yushchenko. It was a time of end of activization of state historical politics, but periodic abusing of history for political purpose was widespread. Mostly it was referring to Soviet cultural legacy. So as you can see here, most of the time Ukrainian authorities haven't tried to make any form of anti-Soviet historical politics, and the only president who tried to do it wasn't really successful at it. And then it was Euromaidan, or Revolution of Dignity. It is a series of massive public protests in Ukraine against President Viktor Yanukovych in December 2013, February 2014. After Euromaidan started rethinking of the place of Soviet cultural legacy in Ukraine, the most striking manifestation of it was massive demolition of Lenin monuments in Ukraine that was named in Ukraine Leninopad, which could translate in English as Lenin Fall. In December 8, 2013, first monument of Lenin demolished in Kiev during Euromaidan protest. And then during 2014, there was 504 monuments of Lenin demolished in Ukraine. Here you can see the map of this demolition. You can see here western regions, because in this region there was demolished earlier in the beginning of 90s. By the end of 2014, rested just one regional center controlled by the Ukrainian government, where a monument of Lenin wasn't demolished. It was city as a region. Here you can see some photos of demolishing Lenin. At the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, 5,000 with a half monuments of Lenin in Ukraine were arrested. Lenin monument in independent Ukraine became a striking example of the invisibility monuments concept. It's lost its symbolic meaning. It's turned into a routine and invisible part of urban space, but after Euromaidan, to some extent, it became visible again. And Lenin Fall was perceived as a public demand of erasing Soviet cultural legacy, and this really became the fairway to the cultural politics of new Ukrainian government. Second factor of demand of new memory politics strategy was war in eastern Ukraine, where Russian separatists made reference to Soviet cultural legacy, the most actively to the Soviet forms of memory of World War II. And of course, Ukrainian authorities have to make some answer on it. Important tool of implementation of Soviet cultural legacy Austin was functioning of the reformed Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance. It was founded by Yushchenko, and shortly after Maidan, it was returned the status of central executive body that was taken in times of Yanukovych presidency. Its director was historian and social activist Volodymyr Vetovich. Some of his quotes to see his vision of strategy of his institution. For example, he called the main task of the institute is transformation it into the national instrument for overcoming of the totalitarian past. Also, he called Lenin for spontaneous Sovietization and gave positive opinion about it. Then one of the biggest challenge for cultural politics of Ukrainian authority is that time was celebration of my name. Commemoration of my name, the Victory Day in World War II. Commemoration of my name were always the most powerful element of Soviet cultural legacy and were cause for political conflicts. Possibility for provocation in 2015 was unanswered on this day. So that's why there was a need for a thinking of concept of my name commemorations. Rethinking started from changes in symbolics of my name commemorations. Ribbon of St. George, which you can see on the right, was the main Russian commemoration symbol of May 9, that also was popular for some time in Ukraine, has become a symbol of pro-Russian separatists, which aim to portray their fights against Ukrainian army as a fight against fascism. A new Ukrainian symbol of May 9 commemoration became the Remembrance Poppy. You can see on the left Ukrainian analog of Remembrance Poppy in the form of MS site and motto Nikola Znowu, which is translated as Never Again. It was designed by a Ukrainian designer on the model of European Remembrance Poppies. And then Institute of National Remembrance in 2015 issued a recommendation to the commemoration of Victory Day. This was such ideas as commemoration of World War II, not just Soviet-German War, which was called in Soviet Union and still called in some post-Soviet countries as Great Patriotic War. This is refusing from celebration of Victory Day in Soviet format, for example, inappropriateness of military parades, also victim form of memory instead of celebration of victory, and commemoration of my 8 in the form of Memory Day along with my 9. All of this idea were new in Ukrainian public sphere, but it was the first time when these ideas were formulated on state level. And in April 9, 2015, these ideas were adopted by Ukrainian parliament in law about commemorating the victory over Nazism in World War II. It was the first time when in official documents was changed the title, was changed the name of commemoration date. Victory over Nazism instead of Victory in Great Patriotic War. That was before it. Then on the eve of the anniversary of Victory Day in 2015, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko called the anti-terrorist operation in the East as Great Patriotic War of 2014. And the military is taking part of it as grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who defended the country 70 years ago. The statement has a strong symbolic capital. It shows the example how latest Ukrainian mythology replaced the Soviet one. Then there was another change in memorial calendar, transfer of the Defender of the Fatherland Day from February 23, which is former Soviet Army Day, to October 14. President first time said about it as a celebration of the Independence Day of Ukraine. He said, Ukraine will never celebrate the holiday by the military historical calendar of neighbor's country. We will honor the defenders of our homeland, not someone else's. October 14 has 3 meanings in Ukrainian culture. It is a religious holiday. It is the day of Ukrainian Cossacks, because Pokrova was protector of Ukrainian Cossacks. And the founding date of the Ukrainian insurgent army. So different social groups could see the celebration as their own. And then really started, in April 2015, started absolutely completely new page in Ukrainian memory politics. In this day were adopted law on conviction communist and national socialist totalitarian regimes in Ukraine and the prohibition of their propaganda and symbols. What idea had this law? It is criminal responsibility for public denial of criminal nature of communist or Nazist regime, prohibition of Soviet symbols such as flags, emblems, atoms, mottos, even quotes of Soviet statesmen, demolition of monuments related to Communist Party, renaming of streets and cities to persons who held leadership position in the Communist Party, the classification of archival documents of the Soviet secret services. This is really a step from ousting and erasing of Soviet legacy to its law prohibition. And it is really a great fracture in perception of Soviet past, a really big change. I could give you just one example. 2 years earlier, in 2012, Communist Party of Ukraine that used Soviet symbolic and some Soviet ideas very actively got on parliamentary election 10% of votes. And then, after just 2 years, even Soviet symbolic become prohibited. Then, the second area of transformation I will talk about is commemoration of Euromaidan. Central motive of it became so-called Heavenly 100. Heavenly 100 is a common name for about 100 people who died during Euromaidan clashes. Central place of commemoration became Institutska Street, where much of the dead protesters were shot by sniper fire. Part of the street was renamed as Avenue of the Heavenly 100 Heroes. Just in the first days after death of protesters, spontaneous memorials with photos of victims, candles and flowers arrayed in a lot of places in Kyiv center. And what is interesting, there still appears even in 2015. It is a spontaneous memorial in Partizan Glory Park in Kyiv that was made by some unknown people, and they established these two memorials of Heavenly 100 by themselves. Memorials and monuments to Heavenly 100 arises in different cities. The biggest of them, you can see on the photo, was established in 2015 in the southern Ukrainian city Mykolaiv. Important feature of commemoration of Euromaidan was the process of replacing Soviet sites of memory by sites of memory of Heavenly Hundreds. Striking example of it, it is memorials of Heavenly 100 that appears on the empty pedestal of Lenin monuments. On the left, you can see on the left you can see spontaneous memorial to Heavenly 100 on a place on empty pedestal of deposit in February monument in Lenin in Ukrainian city Dnipropetrovsk. Local people bring to deposit monument of flaming flags, lamps, posters, and the photographs of victims. On the right you can see a monument of Heavenly 100 in Poltava, and so it was created by coloring the pedestal of deposit Lenin monument. Another example of replacing of Soviet sites of memory by sites of memory connected to Heavenly 100, it is street names. At least 46 streets in 28 towns and village had been renamed in honor to Heavenly 100 or in honor to some members of Heavenly 100 from these cities. The vast majority of named streets had names of Soviet historical features. Other means of Euromaidan's commemoration, it is transformation of urban space. The reconstruction of Kyiv downtown were announced in 2014. The reconstruction had to be in both central part of the city, where protests were held in winter, and had to form the so-called territory of dignity, consisting of public space of Maidan, monument of Heavenly 100, International Cultural Center, and Museum of Maidan. Projects were already announced, they could find on the internet, later on. Then it was commemoration dates. A few anniversaries of Euromaidan events were commemorated. Main commemoration date, its official anniversary became February 20. During the commemoration celebrations in Kyiv of February 20 was launched light installation called Race of Dignity. Light beams were installed on the place of death of activists and symbolize their souls. Then memorable coins by National Bank of Ukraine that was produced a series of collectible coins dedicated to Euromaidan, called by name the Revolution of Dignity, Heavenly 100, and Euromaidan. So, as you can see here, in 2015 was already formed a full range of commemoration around Euromaidan. This suggests the fact that Euromaidan became a distinctive Ukrainian site of memory and important identification mark from this time. and coming to conclusion, what we can say here, in a very short period of time, just a year and a half, Ukrainian society passed through from invisibility of Soviet cultural legacy to its love conviction. Maybe the first time in Ukrainian history, Ukrainian society gave clear request of their vision of memory politics. This could be explained by idea of subjectivation of Ukrainian society by Ukrainian historian Ilya Gerasimov. He regarded that Euromaidan should be viewed as the protest of subjectivation of Ukrainian society, and this can explain why Ukrainian society started to give some requests such as Lenin for spontaneous monuments, which is mostly haven't done before. Then a lot of scholars in politics use the term desovietization, talking about process in cultural politics in Ukraine. I think we should rather call this process visual desovietization than desovietization, because the desovietization is a more complex process that includes a lot of system change in different spheres. However, even visual desovietization could be called an radical shift in the coming of the totalitarian past in Ukraine. And then Ukrainian national history has not always been able to be a powerful catalyst for public mobilization and give a sufficient number of generally accepted identity markers that will replace the Soviet ones, which we could see, for example, in the times of Yushchenko. But the latest common traumatic historical experience could perform this task. And I think that was the thing that outside Soviet cultural legacy. It is firstly common traumatic historic experience. Thank you for your attention.
So, yes, your review.
I wanted to compliment you on the paper. I thought it had a number of strengths. I think the greatest strength is the vast amount of empirical work you've done, especially on the period following the Maidan, which provides a very rich basis of evidence and just a very rich account of what's transpired. And that was really very remarkable to read. At the same time, I think now that you have this incredibly rich material, you should aspire to try to do more with it. That this is, in some sense, one of the largest protest events in Europe on record. It sparked a regime change, and it's been an event of global importance. And while it's important to understand its implications for Ukraine, something that you do very well in the paper, I think it represents an opportunity to make a larger contribution to understanding issues of memory politics cross-nationally and theoretically because of the importance of the event. I think it's an event a lot of people will be studying for a long time, and you're kind of on the ground floor. And if you could begin to do that, I think it would be quite good for you. So I would challenge you to do more with this material to try to address the broader literature on memory politics. As it stands, the case study is still a little too ideographic to make such a contribution. It might represent only now a data resource for others, but you should aspire for your work to make a bigger contribution given the huge amount of data collection that you've done on this. I have suggestions here, but my suggestions might be good as any others, and these may just reflect the biases of the kind of work I would like to do rather than what you would like to do, but I'll mention them anyway. I would try to revise it with reference to well-established theories of memory politics in the literature, and to see how far the extant theories are useful for helping us to understand what the momentous events that have happened in Ukraine, and treat it as an opportunity to uncover their limitations. And where you find limitations, that would allow you to find spaces to innovate in the theory. It would both allow you to situate the Ukrainian case in the larger literature and use it as a way to kind of expand the bounds of theory. And I think that potential is definitely here. One really important professional thing for future conferences, you really need to number the pages of on your papers, so when the people read them, they can refer you to the parts of the paper that they would like to talk about. Now, just a couple of other questions. Some issues that came up that were unclear to me, or things perhaps that I thought you could do better, or places where I even had some differences with you. At times you make it seem like memory politics are driving events. On the first page you even said, perceptions of history fueled conflict in the East. But I think one needs to keep open the possibility that historical memory is something that is manipulated by leaders to induce certain kinds of behaviors in populations, which then are used to justify their policies and authority. These kinds of events are not only popular uprisings. They also interact with the level of leadership in society and are used by politicians. So events in Ukraine revolve around many issues: regime change, international alignment, and the desire of some politicians to take power and others to hold on to it. So I would probably explain memory politics in terms of its instrumental uses by actors as well. And here I mean actors in political society. Now, if you're uncomfortable with that position, I think you would need to at least think more explicitly about how issues of power inform the formation of historical legacy and the uses to which it's put. You may want to privilege the popular side rather than the elite side, but nonetheless, I think you have to incorporate the elite side. So as it stands, you kind of explain events in the Ukraine through popular demands for new forms of public memory. But as I said above, I think it's more complex than this. That is, it makes more sense to think about this through the matrix of organized actors who have agendas and who are motivated by a sense of trying to change the way in which the past is remembered and the way the past is understood in order to create identities that are congruent with their interests. In this sense, it would make sense to treat events as performative acts meant to change historical memory, and that are more purposive rather than spontaneous, or at least some combination thereof. I'm sure you could certainly see Putin's actions from that point of view, that they are purposively evoking certain memories of the past and using them. Another big question, and I'm not sure I have the answer to this, but I want to pose an alternative and see what you make of it. So you treat these acts as de-Sovietization because they're doing things like taking down Lenin statues. But to what extent is this just an attempt to further differentiate Ukrainian from Russian identity? And of course many in Russia, and many particularly in Russia's leadership, don't want to see those identities differentiated. So how much of this is anti-Russian rather than de-Sovietizing? So the Soviet system's been dead for 20 years, or 25 years, practically. While Putin reclaims part of Soviet history, he is hardly Soviet. His regime is hardly Soviet. It's right-wing, it's nationalist, and it's based on a highly patrimonial, resource-extractive state capitalist economy. That doesn't look Soviet. That is the state that is constraining Ukraine's sovereignty at this moment. Similarly, the Ukraine we're talking about doesn't look very Soviet to me either. That it's alternated between more democratic periods and what we in political science call competitive authoritarian periods of rule. And it also suffers from a rather highly inegalitarian form of patrimonial capitalism. So to what extent can we think of this as being Soviet? So to what extent does Soviet really apply to this struggle or the issues between Russia and Ukraine at this point? Is the toppling of Lenin statues really the rooting out of the Soviet system, or removing symbols from a period in which Ukraine was subjugated to Moscow and that happened to go across the regime divide, and whose continued existence can be seen as a kind of token of the transformation of that relationship on a new basis in the post-communist period? How much about this is about breaking bonds with a Russia that's really not Soviet, but merely a great power that's behaving chauvinistically towards its neighbor? Third point, and this is kind of a professional point, you're quite explicit in your political commitments in your language. That is, you call the rehabilitation of Bandera and UPA a question of justice, and you call Yushchenko's historical policies humanitarian, and Yanukovych's the abuse of history. Now, you should not read as what I'm saying to say that I'm taking an anti-Maidan position or that I disagree with you or anything like that. I'm not taking a position on that. But I'm just calling for you to be more dispassionate and scientific in your language. Your moral commitments can make your work look biased and selective, and you really don't want to give that impression. You want to keep a neutral tone and do a very serious analysis of the events, so that a lot of people will read what you want without their ex-ante political commitments biasing them towards what you're writing. Furthermore, even if you are strongly committed to that position, it's better to do a neutral understanding and have a good understanding of the situation before you try and overlay your moral commitments on top of it and use your knowledge to do something about it. That's it.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for the second reviewer, and then maybe you will reply.
So first of all, thank you very much for your
Switch off the
presentation.
mic.
Okay, can I start?
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, and I also would like to express many thanks for the previous reviewer. It's kind of good to see that many points are overlapping, so I just skipped these points that are overlapping, and I completely agree with previous reviewer. And yeah, as a major point, as it was also stated before, is that you're dealing with a lot of historical materials and with a lot of empirical materials. And as it has been said, like in today and also yesterday during last day's presentations and said by other reviewers, that is my quote you, that you somehow need to squeeze it and squeeze it to fit it into some frame, organize into some categories, and set into some theoretical framework. And I mean, I understand that it's still a work in progress, but having this amount of empirical evidence, I suggest you to try at least to navigate towards some legitimate conclusions. What is your statement with this paper? What are your theses? And what can we learn about the vote and about the memory politics from this particular text? And as I said, this empirical materials are really overwhelming, and it might be a major task, a major challenge to organize this chaos into a particular scheme or particular theoretical framework. And my impression was that, I mean, your presentation was a little bit more structured and organized in the paper. So, as the previous reviewer said, was that you might navigate towards some, how you can develop your work further. There are many choices, and it's basically your work and your choice. And I'll just make some comments and suggestions that I think is particularly interesting, at least in my situation and from my perspective. One is that, as you call it, invisible monuments or silent monuments, because the heritage studies typically start with a statement that a heritage is an active use of the past. And what you are saying in your work, that there is a heritage that is passive use of the past, passive use of the heritage, kind of silent heritage, sleeping heritage, invisible heritage that is forgotten, that exists there, but basically doesn't convey any message. So I think it's really worth of elaborating further, and how society finds itself in some pathological homeostasis, that basically there are the monuments kind of triggers that might trigger some historical memories, and basically no one is willing to speak about it and to raise the question and to escalate a larger conflict. So it's like a model of dysfunctional family, that someone in a family is going wrong and everyone just pretends to see that, everyone chooses to pretend that it's like nothing happens. So this is really